We're excited to announce that our very own podcasting platform, Zencastr, has become a new sponsor to the show. Check out the podcast's discount link in our show notes and stay tuned for why we love using Zen for the podcast.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You're listening to the Rock Art Podcast with Dr. Eran Garfinkel, a podcast about all things rock art. Send us your suggestions. Hello and welcome to the Rock Art Podcast with Dr. Eran Garfinkel. On today's episode, we talked to Eran Barnea about his work filming rock art around the world.
This is Rock Art Podcast number 7. Hello out there in podcast land. This is your host, Dr. Eran Garfinkel, founder and president of the California Rock Art Foundation, who sponsors this Rock Art Podcast. And we have with us a world-class researcher. His name is Eran Barnea. He's a cinematographer. Welcome to the Rock Art Podcast, Eran.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. So the reason I invited you is because of your singular accomplishment in traveling the globe and capturing images, cinematography images of the rock art, specifically the petroglyphs of horned ungulates, large horned ungulates. And the reason I use this sophisticated terminology is because in different places around the world, they tend to feature what I call indexical animals as part of their repertoire. So I guess to kick it off, Eran, I'd like you to talk about kind of what you do professionally and your expertise in the world of cinematography. Can we start it out that way?
Well, I come from art background. I'd say I was born in Israel, studied architecture, came to the United States about 25 years ago to work for George Lucas, doing visual effects for movies. So I've been doing that for almost 30 years.
Wow.
Also, about 10 years ago, I started to be interested in documentary filmmaking, especially in the subjects surrounding archaeology.
What got you interested in that, in the archaeology and the documentary side?
Well, it's a combination. The documentary side comes from my dealing with the world of movies. And as far as archaeology, you know, when you grow up in the Middle East, it's all around you. You can leave archaeology. Everywhere you go, you can find stuff. So I've been interested in that for a long time, since my childhood, I think. This is a combination of two of the things I love. Movies and archaeology.
So you get to sort of overlap and synthesize and do two subjects simultaneously and use your expertise and sort of experience the joy and wonder of archaeology, correct?
Well, exactly. I mean, the expertise of archaeology I learn from the people I interview. Lots of interesting people all over the world.
So did you begin in Israel to do some work on this subject? Is that how it all began?
Well, I started to film something in the desert of southern Israel and in Sinai, which was a different subject. But during that filming, I was introduced to rock art. Actually, I was amazed by that because I've been traveling and visiting these places, you know, since I was a teenager and never seen them before. All of a sudden, I was interviewing Professor Emmanuel Anati regarding a different research that he's doing in the desert. And he showed me all this rock art, and they're everywhere.
So who is Emmanuel Anati?
Well, he still is. He's a pioneer, I think, in the field of rock art. He started in the 50s, looking at rock art in the Middle East, in Israel, in Saudi Arabia. And in Italy as well, where he lives. And I think he pioneered this research. Most researchers before him didn't really look at rock art as far as archaeology. And he has a lot of theories. The reason I followed him because He had a theory. He think he discovered the biblical Mount Sinai.
Okay.
So I was trying to follow that because he was trying to connect basically rock art, which until I'd say 1970s, 80s, nobody really cared about in the Middle East.
So it really was not a data set that they were interested in examining, correct?
Not at all. Not at all. The archaeology mainly around Israel is focused on biblical archaeology. Everybody wants to find proof of King David and Jesus Christ.
So tell me about the data set of rock art in Israel. So where in Israel was the rock art that you and Emmanuel Anadi were studying?
In the southern desert.
In the southern deserts.
Yeah, it's all over the Negev Desert and the Sinai Peninsula, which is now part of Egypt.
Okay.
But these things are all over the place, and they started in the Neolithic, about 10,000 years ago, and the main production of petroglyphs was from about 8,000 years ago to about 4,000 years ago.
And what is the subject matter in those petroglyphs from 8,000 years ago on up? What do we see in the imagery?
Well, the interesting thing is that you can see subject matters that repeat themselves over and over, all over the desert and throughout any period of time. Since the very early ones till the very late ones, they deal with the same subject matter. And what you see mostly are animals. And the most prominent animal that you see there is the ibex, the mountain goat.
And what is an ibex?
Well, ibex is a wild mountain goat. It's probably the most impressive mammal that lives there in the desert.
It's got enormous horns, doesn't it?
Enormous, crescent-shaped horns.
Right.
Very impressive
And
animal.
I guess it's one of those world-class animals that some of these hunters like to kill and mount those heads on the walls, right?
Well, yeah, it's been a hunting animal for, since the beginning of humankind, and until today, it's the best trophy you can get. It's an impressive animal. Because of that, this animal almost completely disappeared in Asia and the Middle East. It's very rare now, and it's very protected.
Yeah, but that image is something that's emblazoned on the rocks, isn't it?
Yes. All over the place. And then I realized it's not only there. It's the same imagery that repeats itself beyond, the southern desert of Israel.
When we see the image, on what kinds of rocks is this image portrayed, and how do they produce it? How is it preserved?
Well, like any other petroglyph, this it's carved in the rock, exposing the outer patina of the rock, make it brighter than the outside surface of the rock.
Is it on a basalt, like a lava basis?
No, it's not basalt. It's more like a flint.
Oh, it's more like a
rocks.
flint. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I guess they do peck through that desert varnish, and somehow the light heart rock comes out, and then it preserves for thousands of years, correct?
Exactly. And there are also some very ancient ones, around 10,000 years or so, where the desert varnish already came back to its original color. So you can barely see any difference between the pecking and the original surface. You can just see the drawing only by the depth of the rock.
So the desert varnish, that varnish is recreated over time, and so then the image itself becomes the same color as the background?
Exactly.
I see. And so how does that image, what exactly is in that image, the designs and the specifics? What are they portraying? We know that there's an ibex depicted, but what else is in that picture? And what do people hypothesize is the reason that they depicted the animal?
Well, the first thing that you see is, hunting scenes, hunting ibex. And that's why people didn't consider it to be much, because it looks like just nomads portraying their everyday life, hunting animals. The first problem starts when you look at when these were produced. And the time when these were produced, the nomads of the desert were not hunter-gatherers anymore. They were pastoral people. They had herds. Their diet was based on their herds, not on hunting. So that was not their everyday life. If it was depicting real life hunting, it must have been some sort of a ceremonial hunting or something like that, but something special. It's not an everyday activity.
So the people who crafted the most ancient images were not hunter-gatherers or foragers. They were horticulturalists, correct? They were sort of incipient nomads. Anyways, they were
correct. People argue that these themes started during the Paleolithic when they were hunter-gatherers. Mm-hmm. We can see similar things in the caves of Europe. You see animals and hunting scenes, and we don't know what they mean, but according to the research of von Betzinger, the Canadian scientist who investigated the caves of Europe of the Ice Age, she found that there are also symbols drawn there with the animals, and not just symbols like an arbitrary or any number of symbols, but there's a finite number of symbols. There's, I think, 32 symbols all over, meaning they use some sort of symbolic language there to describe whatever they wanted to describe. So there's some sort of importance to these pickings, some message they wanted to portray beyond just, oh, I killed this big trophy. It's not about it. It's about something else. And then you start looking at other designs that are picked next to the ibex or whatever angulated animal it is, and you find more stuff.
The earliest images of the ibex on the rock in the Negev in the southern deserts of Israel, do they ever show other figures or other writing or anything else in association with those images?
Well, there are no writings yet because they're writing, or the alphabet, although invented there in Sinai, was invented about 1700 BC.
Okay.
Then once there's alphabet, you can see alphabet next to the ibex, but that's only 3,000 years ago. 8,000 years ago, there was no alphabet. So you don't see that. You see sign language.
And what do you have figures that are associated with the ibex? And if they are, that you said they're actively hunting, are they using ancient weaponry or more recent?
Sometimes they're hunting. They could be hunting. Sometimes they're doing something else. They could be just standing next to the ibex or under it or above it, raising their hands, for example. And a stick figure raising the hands up has a cultic context. We don't know if it's a person. Yeah, we don't know if it's a person, a shaman, a priest, or a deity, but it has cultic contexts of adoration, prayer, something like that.
I see. So this was the first data set that you ran into that had this particular set of imagery on it. So we see ibexes, the animal ceremonialism. You've got individuals there that they believe are either hunting or they're in some sort of adorant posture where their arms are either probably either outwards or upwards. Are they mostly upwards or are they outwards?
Upwards. I think outwards is a different symbol. I think when it's stretched outwards, also the fingers are emphasized, and I think this is a different symbol. But hands up is definitely adoration. It could be sometimes only the right hand is up and the left is down.
Interesting.
There is a development like that recently, later on became a symbol of a deity in Mesopotamia.
So you see an evolution in the symbols over the thousands of years they were produced? It changes from one to the next?
Oh, yeah. That's one of the interesting things that I did is checking the evolution of the symbolism over time and how it became from simple descriptions of the nomads to a more complex description in the civilized world with the same themes or motifs described. And you can see the evolution of a deity, for example, from the simple rock art to how it's described in Mesopotamians' reliefs and statues.
So is this specifically on the Negev or southern desert of Israel rock art that you see this change?
That's where I started, and then I realized it's all over the Middle East.
Okay. I think I understand. Well, we're almost ready for this segment to end, but I want to put some closure on this, and maybe you can reflect on what you learned just from the Negev at seed to begin this research. We'll move ahead in the next segment to sort of embellish this and continue working on the research that Eran Barnea has done in Israel and around the world. Thanks.
Chris Webster here for the Archaeology Podcast Network. We strive for high-quality interviews and content so you can find information on any topic in archaeology from around the world. One way we do that is by recording interviews with our hosts and guests located in many parts of the world all at once. We do that through the use of Zencastr. That's Zencastr. Zencastr allows us to record high-quality audio with no stress on the guest. Just send them a link to click on, and that's it. Zencastr does the rest. They even do automatic transcriptions. Check out the link in the show notes for 30% off your first 3 months, or go to zencastr.com and use the code ROCKART. Looking to expand your knowledge of X-rays and imaging in the archaeology field? Then check out An Introduction to Paleoradiography, a short online course offering professional training for archaeologists and affiliated disciplines. Created by archaeologist, radiographer, and lecturer James Elliott, the content of this course is based upon his research and teaching experience in higher education. It is approved by the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists as 4 hours of training. That's in the UK, for those of you that don't know. So don't miss out on this exciting opportunity for professional and personal development. For more information on pricing and course structure, visit paleoimaging.com. That's PALEO imaging.com, and look for the link in the show notes to this episode.
Welcome back to the Rock Art Podcast, number 7. We're in the second phase of our interaction with Eran Barnea, and he's going to be talking about his adventures throughout the world, capturing the imagery of the longhorned artiodactyls, the hooved animals that are depicted on rocks. Eran, take it away. Where did you go after you did your studies in Israel?
Well, I went to several places. First, I realized that what I'm seeing in Israel does not exist only there, but it's all over the place.
What made you recognize that the imagery can be found elsewhere? How did you learn that? How did you discover that?
Well, first I started to interview an expert in Israel, Dr. Uzi Avner. He showed me imagery from around the world and gave me the first hints what to look for. And then the internet's been a very good resource to research and see where things are.
When you talked to your Israeli researcher and did your internet research, where in the world do we find depictions of these longhorned, hooved animals?
We're everywhere, basically. Okay. Everywhere where people lived.
Okay.
All continents.
Okay.
I was in South Africa, seen it there, and then decided that I want to dedicate the research to the Northern Hemisphere. So went to visit... Well, there are too many places, so I had to pick my battles. For some areas, either I could not get into or it was too complicated, so I hired local cinematographers to shoot some footage for me and interview experts, like in Iran. I have nice footage from there, from Tajikistan.
Where is Tajikistan?
It's, Central Europe. It's the Wakhan Valley. It's a corridor along the Silk Road. Silk Road.
So we have
many caravans
Iran,
pass by.
Tajikistan. Where else?
The Himalayas in Kashmir, where Dr. Lunroth is working. And I sent a cinematographer together with him to climb the Himalayas and get some footage from there. I went myself to Mongolia, to the Altai Mountains. Interviewed a couple of researchers over there. And then the American Great Basin, mainly California.
And who'd you interview there?
Somebody call Professor Alan Garfinkel.
Can you imagine? What a concept. So let's go through these various places that you gave us this laundry list. Which one you want to talk about first? How about South Africa? Do you have a little bit of tidbits you can tell us about South Africa, about the subject matter?
Yeah, well, South Africa is a little different than the other parts that I visited because it's in the southern hemisphere. And all those in the northern hemisphere have something in common. I can talk about it
And what
later.
is that?
Well, they are related to the constellations of, the stars in the night sky.
And how did you learn that?
Well, that's a different story then.
Yeah, I jumped. I'm so sorry. Please.
Which one do you want to do before the constellations or South Africa?
Constellations. Tell us about constellations.
Okay. Well, we can see that one main trope or motif in the rock art is the hunting scenes. And as I mentioned before, it seems like it's not much just hunting, but as you look closely into it, it is not just hunting scene. It's a metaphor. It's a representation of some mythology, some mythic hero, some mythical event. And the components of this composition is mainly a hunter, at least one or two hunters sometimes with a bow and arrow. They're accompanied by dogs. They have hunting dogs.
Yes.
And they're hunting an animal, mostly angulated animal. It could be a horse, but mostly it'll be an ibex. If not, it'll be a sheep, a cow, a deer, something like that.
Some sort of long-horned animal, correct?
Yeah. And the depiction is the same. It follows the same standard. It's a standardized symbol. Always the animal, the prey, is bigger than the hunter and the dog, much bigger.
Oh.
Its tail is always up.
Tail is always
which is
up.
very interesting.
Uh-huh.
And it never dies.
So it's never a dead animal. They're always vital and lively and abundant and jumping and active.
Always, except one petroglyphs in the coastal,
Yeah,
that
but it is indeed
specific
rather
one,
rare
but
to see dead animals.
Very, yeah, they're always alive.
Interesting.
So there's some standard here that has symbolism in it that everybody followed.
So most of your work has been in the northern hemisphere rather than the southern hemisphere. So the first place you went was South Africa. Your next research was where?
Well, mainly Mongolia, I'd say, and a lot of information from Iran, Tajikistan, and the Himalayas.
So tell me if the landform or the context of how these images are crafted, is the rock canvas the same or is it different?
I'd say the canvas itself, what's important about it is that it has to be near some sort of a sacred ground.
Okay.
It's not just anywhere. And the rock itself has to be of the right material that you can peck on it and expose the patina. I think that's the necessary requirement. I didn't think there's any specific significance for the orientation or anything like that. I think the symbols on the rock are organized according to the surface, to the topology of the rock itself.
So when you say that the location of this imagery, no matter where it is in the northern hemisphere, it always seems to be associated with sacred ground. What evidence, what either ethnographic or historical evidence do we have for that assertion?
Well, depends if you're talking about America or the Old World.
Okay.
In the Old World, there's we have a problem that the people that manufacture these petroglyphs are gone. We don't even know who they are. So there's no barely any ethnographic record. But these guys also built some structures, very primitive, but they did mainly lines of rocks or rock circles or cairns or standing stones, something like that. So they had like little shrines.
Yeah. Are those shrines found originally in Israel?
Well, again, like the petroglyphs, it's something that people really didn't look at.
Okay.
And, it's pile of rocks, half a meter tall. It's nothing.
Mm-hmm.
When you're looking for like amazing architectural structures, you don't even look at these things. And this guy that I interviewed, Professor Uzi Avner, who's looking at these in the Negev desert, he's just walking the desert and finding these, and he's found hundreds of them, just there. And then I see that there are occasionally people find them, maybe more impressive ones, but all over the deserts in Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and they're all over in Mongolia as well. You can see piles of stones or standing stones, what they call deer stones, which are definitely cultic structures. And there are always the petroglyphs associated somehow with this environment. Now, sometimes you can see, for example, footprints on petroglyphs next to the animals. And footprints, those indicate sacred ground. There are temples that have these too. So you can see the correlation of a sacred ground with the footprint.
So are they human footprints or animal footprints, or both?
Well, in the old world, it's human. In America, there are lots of animal footprints. Who knows what that means?
But human footprints are characteristic of this holy ground and this sacred nature of those images.
Yes.
Interesting. And that particular tradition continues, and you see that in certain religious associations?
Well, you can see that, for example, taking off your shoes when you get into a holy ground, right? Like Hindus and Muslims do that, taking off their shoes. You can see in the Bible when they was it Moses who in the Old Testament where exactly.
Someone says,
so God tells him, take off your shoes because this ground is
you're standing
holy.
on holy ground, right?
Exactly,
I had never thought about that. Yeah,
you see that, and you can see the standing stones. You can see that in the Bible as well as the early formation of religion. When Jacob erects a standing stone and then slips by it, and he sees the angels come up and down from heaven on it.
That's right. Almost like a ladder.
It's the same thing.
Yeah,
it's the ladder. Yeah, exactly. And you see those all over the desert, those erected stones, and in Mongolia as well, throughout Asia.
So I think that one of the things is with these, with this posture of holy hands or erect hands that are upwards thrust, and the upward thrusting of the stones, at least for my study, and I'm sure from yours as well, it appears to be some sort of a symbolism or a metaphor connecting the celestial world to the terrestrial. In other words, from the divine, the deities, the gods and goddesses of the heavens to the more mundane path of humankind on the landscape.
Yes, exactly. And it has to do also with the worship of ancestors.
Yes, ancestors. Thank you. Thank you for reminding me. Yes, that seems to be so centrally important throughout the world, certainly with native or indigenous people that remember the ancestors, worship the ancestors, and in fact, use the ancestors as they pass sometimes as intermediaries or liaisons between ourselves and the deities. Am I correct?
Exactly. And that happens the same thing in Asia and the Middle East. They were erecting these stones, whether it's the deities or the ancestors, probably many times for the ancestors, they were pouring some sort of either water or wine or something on the rock.
A libation of some sort, an offering.
Libation. And then they would sacrifice an animal, and they were sitting down and eat it together with the ancestors.
Right.
And then make their prayers.
So
that's the basic ceremony.
It was a means of connecting to the supernatural And
Exactly.
these weren't necessary priests, so these were commoners, weren't they? In some ways.
Oh, everybody did
Okay.
that. You didn't have to
Okay.
have a mediator. You did it yourself. And part of the ceremony was hunting the animal. You hunted the animal, and then you sacrificed it to the ancestors or the deities, and consume it together with them. And so the hunting is a phase in a cultic process, basically, which later became, in every religion, there was a sacrifice, basically, as part of the ceremony
The central
to worship the
sacrifice.
god.
In Judaism and in Catholicism, we still to this very day have that. We worship a cross with the sacrifice of Christ on it. We also ingest a wafer that is the body and blood and soul of our deity, which is Christ, and that's considered a sacrifice. And so
Exactly, and the
even to this
correlation
very
between
day,
Christ.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, Christ is described as the Lamb of God. So here you go. That's the prey, basically, the sacrifice prey that you connect to the early stages of cultic activity or religion, if you want to call it like that, to Christianity.
So it isn't coincidence that we look at a sheep or a lamb and we call Jesus the Lamb of God. And what we're looking at here under your research is this artiodactyl, this hooved animal that has horns and is available all over the world to study and worship.
Yeah, it's not a coincidence. One is the evolution of the other.
Okay. Well, that's about all we have time for the second part of our discussion. But I think in the last part of our discussion, I'd like to get into the nitty gritty and the reflections and the discoveries you've made about the evolution and similarities and patterns of the religious worship and veneration, the cultic elements that you found throughout the world. See you on the other side.
You may have heard my pitch for membership. It's a great idea and really helps out. However, you can also support us by picking up a fun t-shirt, sticker, or something from a large selection of items from our TeePublic store. Head over to arcpodnet.com/shop for a link. That's arcpodnet.com/shop to pick up some fun swag and support the show.
Well, this is the Rock Art Podcast number 7 in the third segment, the final piece. We've got Eran Barnea, the world-class cinematographer, who's been studying the animals that are ungulates, that have hooves, that have big long horns, and he's been all over the world doing so. He's a cinematographer, and we're going to be discussing the symbolism for this and bring it full circle back into the United States and talk about COSO. Eran, if you could maybe begin to reflect on maybe what you've discovered and what you've uncovered with your worldwide studies on the horned ungulates depicted on the rocks for the last 10,000 odd years.
Well,
yeah, just in 30 seconds. In 30 seconds, if you could please just give me the bottom line.
Well, in 30 seconds, I discovered that the rock art all over the world is expressing pretty much the same thing, which is some sort of a mythology, a very ancient mythology that was universal and is very similar all over the Northern Hemisphere. And the evolution of this is what we see today is modern religions. This is the bottom line.
And how did we get from looking at sheep and goats and wild animals and sacrifice to modern religion? What does it have to do with anything else?
Well, this is you have to study it step by step. It's not a direct connection. It does a lot of twists and turns throughout the evolution. But essentially, if you look at every ceremony formed now in the Judeo-Christian world, it is basically a prayer that commemorates some sort of a sacrifice. The Christian prayer is based on the sacrifice of Christ. The Jewish prayer today is a replacement for the sacrifice that they did in the temple. After the Jewish temple was destroyed, they replaced the sacrificing animals by prayer. So it basically the same thing. It is. If you go one step backwards and you look at these societies that were sacrificing animals, they were commemorating a hunt, basically. So initially, there were hunting societies that they were hunting the animal, slaughtering it, sacrificing it to the gods, and praying. The later stage was to eliminate the hunting, and then you remain only with sacrificial and prayer. And the stage we are at is we just have the prayer that commemorates the previous two stages, if that makes any sense.
No, it does. It makes a lot of sense. So in my own work, of course, in the Coso range of Eastern California in the Western Mojave Desert, which has the greatest concentration of rock images in the entire Western Hemisphere, what they seem to be obsessed with, which is no surprise, is bighorn sheep. They believe that between 25 and 50% of the inventory of 100,000 images in about 100 square miles, we have between 25 and 50,000 depictions of bighorn sheep. Now, you mentioned that the depictions of these animals are always lively and alive. And that's interesting because that's something that I've talked about and reflected upon. And that is not that's not always a common interpretation. One of my colleagues believed that these are spirit animals, and they're actually he would say they're dead, and that they're being depicted on the rocks in some sort. I don't know if it's veneration or whatever, but I have to disagree because it appears to me when you see this abundance of depictions of animals and their mobility and their liveliness and the action that seems to be captured with them is an indication that they in fact are meant to communicate life and not death. Do you find that all over the world? Is that the way it is depicted or no?
Well, the interesting thing is that this is not the only thing that is similar between what we see in America and the old world. If you look at the American rock art only, you can, I guess, make a guess whether they're dead or alive or what. But if you compare it to what you see in the old world, you can see also that the same parameters work here in California or in the Great Basin. The animal is not only alive, but it's always bigger than the hunter, and the tail is always up. It's not just alive, but its tail is up, and that is very significant.
Right. I guess we can riff on the tail for a few moments. Why don't you open it up, and then you and I can collaborate on sort of talking about this tail posture. Do you want to start?
Well, yeah, I heard about that from researchers in the old world, and then you told me exactly the same thing about here in California. And what I heard about, the Asian petroglyphs of the tail up is that they mean that it's a symbol of fertility.
It's a symbol of
fertility. These animals are always with their tail down in nature. Their tail is up only when they're mating. In the mating season.
So what we've seen, of course, just piggybacking on that statement, is that that's been a question that appeared in the literature for quite some time in America about the tail posture. It was noticed that the tail was either horizontal to the ground or upwards towards the sky, and as you're well aware, and as you just stated, on these animals, on these ungulates, the tail is nicely tucked between their backside, and in fact, it's not something that one even would illustrate because it's not a prominent feature of this elegant, impressive, and magnificent animal. Why would you even show the tail to begin with, right?
Yeah, exactly. Unless it's a significant symbol of something.
Right. So what I learned which took me a hell of a long time to find out, was that the animals, the bighorn sheep and domestic sheep for that matter, only have their tail up is when a female sheep is in estrus and wants to show that they're open for reproduction. And the terminology of the wildlife biologists call it flagging. And so the tail posture when it's up means in a system, I call it reproductive symbolism. It means that life is coming, reproduction is coming, the renewal of sort of the supernatural energy of the cosmos is allowing for this magical time where we can reproduce and renew us and create life. Correct?
Correct. On a personal level and
Yes.
on Earth level,
So
which
explain
means
that. Explain
rain. It brings fertility to people, and it means rain as well. Fertility for the earth.
Right. And so what I found cosmologically, if you can bring it back to the American plane or the Great Basin plane, and in an article that I had in the Cambridge Archaeological Journal on reproductive symbolism, and then elsewhere talking about the symbolism, what's interesting is these Uto-Aztecan people, these Great Basin people, they would be called the Paiute of the Shoshone, as well as those even into Mesoamerica who are Uto-Aztecan speakers of a language related to this, one of the largest linguistic groups in all of the Americas, I understand, is that they had a layered world. They had a stratified world. Is that correct? Worldwide, that's a very common paradigm, isn't it, Eran?
Yes, although this you learn mainly from, I guess, here from anthropology,
Right.
and in the old world from written records that
Yes.
describe their heaven and earth and all that.
Right.
Obviously, it's different, but it is layered.
So it is a layered universe. Okay, so the reason I bring this up, and the reason this is something that appears to be significant to me, is that this uppermost level, or this higher celestial level, is the level of the mountaintops, and it's also associated with the color white. Why is it white? Well, it's white because clouds are white. It's white because snow is white. It's white because that's where the rain comes from. It's white because of the tail patch, the white tail patch of the bighorn sheep, and also the kind of avian creature that is considered most sacred or most powerful or most religiously persuasive in the uppermost realm is the eagle. And the eagle has this white underbelly and white tail feathers that, of course, were used extensively throughout the Americas, and certainly in the Great Basin as well, as a symbol of power, the eagle feathers and the bighorn sheep. So what does this all mean, Eran? What about the sky? What about the celestial kingdom, and how does that relate back to this imagery?
Well, to make a long story short, the imagery in the old world of the dog attacking the animal became later in Mesopotamia a lion attacking a bull. It's the same imagery and means the same thing. This is according to a research from the 1960s by a German mathematician and archaeologist.
Mm-hmm.
And so he said, in order for us to understand the symbol of the dog chasing an ibex, we have to see where it evolved. And it evolved to a lion attacking a bull, which is a myth that we can understand. And what it is, it's all about a resurrecting God, a God that dies and resurrects, where the bull represents the constellation of Taurus,
Okay.
and the lion is the constellation of Leo. And the constellation of Taurus basically they were measuring when the equinox occurs according to that constellation. Basically, it's the Pleiades that became part of Taurus, but the Pleiades were the main constellations that these ancient people looked at to determine the fall and spring equinoxes according to their heliacal rising.
And so these are northern constellations of the northern hemisphere, correct?
These are constellations of the northern hemisphere, which are mainly the most visible constellations in the sky that you can see at very specific times of the year. And this is the Pleiades, or Taurus, the bull, Orion, the hunter, and Sirius, the dog. And these are exactly the same characters that we see on the rocks.
And then those particular constellations are significant for all of these various cultures throughout the world that also depict these same animals on the rocks, correct?
Exactly. So it seems like the symbols were exactly the same. And if you look at the anthropology record of the Great Basin, a lot of tribes here believe that the bighorn sheep are actually the belt of Orion's belt.
Absolutely. That's the Kumeyaay and the Great Basin groups, the Chemehuevi, they call it the hunter and the bighorn sheep. They again consistently identify that, and I presume that goes along with your same suggestion or interpretation in terms of the model of understanding the cosmological realm and how this all works out for people all over the world.
It's the same mythology of a hunter that goes to hunt an animal and pursue the hunt until they go in the sky, and they show up in the sky. When they show up in the sky, the rain comes, and then they die, and then they come back to life again.
So this entire cosmological nexus, the package, is about death, it's about life, it's about resurrection, it's about sacrifice, it's about the ancestors, it's about prayer, and it all interfingers with both the cosmos and the terrestrial world in terms of the rituals of people for the last 10,000 years.
Exactly. That's what people were interested in.
Yeah, and I guess they're still interested in enough to go to church and still worship a God that appears to help us and renew our life. And in the spring, we still want to see things that grow and renew. And we hope every day and pray that the sun comes up and that God gives us another day. Isn't that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Because if he doesn't, we're dead. Well, I think that winds us up. Eran, I can't believe this went so fast, and you took us around the world. Yeah, we're done. We're in the final moments. You have a final.
So much to talk about.
We have lots to talk about and just began to scratch the surface. Thank you ever so much of coming on this show and sharing your insights and wisdom worldwide on the extraordinarily horned animals and the petroglyphs, the rock drawings throughout the Northern Hemisphere.
Thank you, Alan.
Thanks for listening to the Rock Art Podcast with Dr. Alan Garfinkel and Chris Webster. You can find this podcast on the educational podcast app Lyceum, Lyceum, and wherever you find podcasts. Find show notes and contact information at www.arcpodnet.com/rockart. Thanks for listening, and thanks for sharing this podcast with your family and friends. This show is produced and recorded by the Archaeology Podcast Network, Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, in Reno, Nevada, at the Reno Collective.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.arcpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 US a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to arcpodnet.com/members for more info.